Je déclare la réunion ouverte. Bienvenue à la réunion 25 du comité.
Pursuant to the, well, first of all, of course, we recognize that we meet on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, Chi-Miigwech. Pursuant to the order of the House, the committee is continuing its study of Bill C-10, an act respecting the Commissioner for Modern Treaties. I would like to welcome everyone. As an individual, we have David Wright, Associate Professor of Faculty of Law of the University of Calgary. Welcome. From the Cree Nation, we have Chief Paul Murdoch by video conference. Hello, Chief. And we have Dwayne. He is a executive counselor. Welcome from the Teslin Tinling Council. And welcome to you, Dwayne. And he is also on a video conference. And we also have Lori on video conference as well. She's been joining us frequently through this study, and so we welcome her as well. So let's proceed right now. So everyone's making a presentation.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So we have 5 minutes each. I will remind you when you have 30 seconds to wrap up so that you can do that, and you can get everything out in questions and answers as well if you haven't quite finished your 5-minute round. So let's proceed. Okay, so let's start with David from the Faculty of Law, University of Calgary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee, fellow witnesses and officials. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today regarding Bill C-10. My name is David Wright, and I'm a law professor with the University of Calgary Faculty of Law. I appear before you as an individual, although I understand my name was put forward by the Land Claims Agreement Coalition as someone who has worked, researched, and written in this area extensively. Prior to my academic appointment, I held several roles, including legal counsel with the Gwich'in Tribal Council, for whom I still act from time to time, and as a lawyer and auditor for the Federal Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development, housed in the Office of the Auditor General for 5 years. This latter role in particular informs my perspectives today. My opening comments complement those of the esteemed witnesses you have heard from already, including Indigenous leaders from modern treaty contexts across Canada. In these opening comments, I offer three interrelated perspectives that will assist this committee in situating Bill C-10 in the broader law, policy, and institutional landscape for modern treaty implementation. The first, follow through. Bill C-10 can be seen as the federal government simply following through on an existing commitment to create such an institution. Indigenous modern treaty partners have called for the creation of this institution since 2003, including tabling of the formal proposal by the Land Claims Agreement Coalition in 2017. In recent years, the federal government has been a constructive partner in pursuing this agenda, articulating this in several documents, including the 2023 Modern Treaty Implementation Policy and the 2023 to 28 UNDRIP Action Plan at Chapter 5. And that commitment has also been reiterated by the Prime Minister and several ministers in the years since 2023. In light of these clearly articulated commitments and intentions by the federal government, Bill C-10 represents a rare and important opportunity to simply follow through on this important shared Crown Indigenous objective. Number two, whole of government approach. The Commissioner is a key missing piece in the federal government's stated intention to take a whole-of-government approach to modern treaty implementation. For more than a decade, beginning with the 2015 Cabinet Directive put in place by the Harper administration, led by then-Minister Valcourt, the federal government has committed to taking a whole-of-government approach to modern treaty implementation. That commitment's been repeated, of course, many times, for example, in the 2015 Statement of Principles on Modern Treaty Implementation, numerous departmental reports, and the aforementioned Commissioner for Collaborative Modern Treaty Implementation Policy. That whole government approach, as you've heard, is required because treaties cumulatively include thousands of obligations that the Crown must fulfill. And those Crown modern treaty obligations reside not with any single government department, but with the Crown as a whole. And because no single department can meaningfully ensure that this whole of government approach is actually fulfilled, implementation challenges are systemic and stubborn. As such, this Commissioner fills an important institutional gap by ensuring sustained independent oversight focused on implementation and getting better information to guide the Crown Indigenous modern treaty relationships. The powers and authorities set out in C-10 offer a very important bird's eye view with sightlines that don't exist elsewhere in the government. Third and finally, deference to the existing text version of Bill C-10. Bill C-10 really does represent an exemplary approach to collaborative Crown Indigenous co-development of legislation, leading to, as you've heard from numerous witnesses, broad support across Indigenous modern treaty parties, meaning the text of the present version deserves strong deference. I would think most would agree that the process was one of the very finest examples of legislative co-development with the federal government, and I commend all the officials involved in that exercise. Bill C-10 is the outcome of that collaborative process. Modern treaties parties put their trust in that process, engaged in good faith, and endorsed the tabled version without amendment. It is important to acknowledge that amendments at this stage would essentially amount to unilateral change by the Crown. And of course, such unilateral acts are precisely part of the problem in this historically fraught Crown-Indigenous relationship. To amend at this late stage would be contrary to nation-to-nation dealings, the shared objective of reconciliation, and the spirit and intent of the aforementioned policies and modern treaties themselves. And so as a final closing comment, let me just step back for a second and say that from my perspective, the Commissioner would just help everybody do their job better. In my experience with the Federal Environment Commissioner, most audits are actually quite collaborative, with departments and officials, including very senior officials, quickly realizing that there's a shared interest in continual improvement. The mere existence of the Commissioner's Office would likely help all departments and officials up their game, and from there, the reports and recommendations would provide a robust, substantiated body of information and findings to guide and inform forward progress in pursuit of fulfilling treaty objectives and the shared goal of reconciliation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And now we are going to go to Grand Chief Murdoch, please, who is online.
Wajek, mshti tu idan askam don veje butsun gyato tezi the badjumiat. Alwege we nation kokot staxen we idan askam to go u edut next abachunek I shouldn't make the amunan de that. I'll keep my comments relatively short. They're pretty much in line with Mr. Wright's presentation, although I doubt I'll sound as eloquent. So I'm a recently elected Grand Chief. This is my first time in office, was elected in July. Grand Chief of 9 communities, 2 emergent communities. And I just wanted to share something that happened at the very beginning of my term, being relatively new to the office. And having worked as an attorney mostly, I had a pretty narrow view, I think, of the challenges that faced our community and our communities, sorry. And quickly on seeing the social problems that we were dealing with, still problems with overcrowding in housing, employment problems with, our exploding population, and the challenges of holding on to our culture and language. I called a meeting quite early on with all of my chiefs because I was feeling a little overwhelmed. This wasn't at all what I was expecting. And I was really surprised at, even though we spent all day talking about just heartbreaking issues, I was really surprised at the optimism of my chiefs and my staff. And I was kind of wondering what was going on. And it took me a little while to realize, and one of my fellow chiefs kind of pulled me aside and took me under their wing. And that's when I saw that we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Jamestown Northern Quebec Agreement this year, which has been amended 30 times. We have the Cree Canada New Relationship Agreement, the Cree Canada Governance Agreement. And in there are tools that allow my chiefs and my staff to look at challenges that we're facing, but with optimism and a sense of empowerment. And so when I saw this hearing coming up and reading the brief that was tabled before and looking at all the exchanges that were happening, I thought it was important to point out, and I love that the word relationship is being used so much, because all of the relationships that we have in the past, in the Cree Nation, we're proud of them. We're proud of our current relationship with the Government of Canada. And I think this commissioner, and just the way this act was developed, it allows us to stand shoulder to shoulder with Canada instead of face to face, where we're each alone on either side. The Cree Nation government had submitted a submission in June 2024. I didn't agree with all of the recommendations that were made. So I guess it's good that I wasn't a Grand Chief then, because an attorney who represents themselves has an idiot for a client, apparently. But the ones that I did agree with, you all accepted. So that was great news. But so in closing, I just wanted to say, looking at the documentation, speaking to my staff, I was very proud of how this law has come about. And in a world that's defined by division and negativity, I thought it would be important to take this opportunity to express gratitude for the collaboration and how we got here. Specifically, Matt Sargent, Senior Director of the Modern Treaty and Self-Government Policy Directorate, and his team at the Policy and Partnerships Branch at CERNAC. So, yeah, it's basically to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And congratulations, Grand Chief, on your recent election. So next we go to the Executive Councillor, Yanye D. You will have 5 minutes for a presentation. Thank you.
Merci, thank you. Miigwech, Walalan. Gastad kakushnuk yuchatu asauk, yuchatu asauk. Goch nachat city an yedi achat, like kayadika de shitan dat shantra hat, detlis and kwan I hat, atling glitchish algonquin kwan. Hello, everybody. My name is Dwayne Castano Kwan. I'm of the Inland Tlingit Nation. My moiety is Wolf. My clan is Yanyedi. I'm a white man child. My dad's family immigrated, Acadian people immigrated from France in 1640, settled in what is now Port Royal. And I'm from Teslin, Yukon, and I'm a guest of the Algonquins in the Ottawa Valley. I'm not a newbie. I've been on the council since 2009, so this is my 17th year on executive council. Teslin-Tlingit Council is a modern treaty nation. We signed our agreement in 1993, and it came into full effect in 1995. It's an amazing agreement, and it's a sign of reconciliation with the Crown and Indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, we have issues with implementation. And so it's great on paper, but when it comes to being implemented, that's where the falling down happens. Unfortunately, Teslin-Tlingit Council, we've had to take the Crown to court a few times. Back in 2015, we took the Harper Conservatives to court because they unilaterally changed the Yukon Environmental Socioeconomic Assessment Act. And then 3 years later, we took the Trudeau Liberals to court because they weren't honoring the financial transfer agreement. And the only ones we haven't taken to court yet is so we're equal opportunity. So the only ones we haven't taken to court yet are the NDP, and because they've never been in federal power. But we might be taking the BC NDP to court. So there we go. They're not off the hook. One time I was talking to the Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, back when it looked like he might win the election. When was that? 2019. My quick conversation to him was explain to him who I was, what nation I was from. And I said, the message that we have to you and to whoever sits in that seat of government is that we don't care who sits in that seat, Liberal, Conservative, NDP, because we have a treaty with the Crown. So whoever sits in that seat, they have the duty to live up to the treaty that we signed with the Crown and implement it. It's pretty simple. So one thing that we see with this modern treaty commissioner is the ability to not go to court, the ability to try to work things out without having to go to litigation. Litigation's always there, and if have no pipe dreams that the modern treaty commissioner will be solving all problems and walking on water and raising the dead. But we do have high hopes that it'll improve the relationship that we have with the Crown, no matter who sits in that seat, without having to go to the courts. Let's work together as equal partners. Let's hold each other up. And as was said before, that our treaty is not with Indian Affairs, our treaty is not with Indigenous Services. Our treaty is with the Crown, with the all of government. And so this modern treaty commissioner, hopefully, will help improve that situation and help improve the lives of our people with Teslin-Tlingit Council and within the Yukon as well, because these treaties will benefit everyone. So Gunchish, merci, thank you, Walalan, Miigwech.
Thank you very much for sharing your years of experience with us today. So we're going to go to rounds of questions, and the first round is 6 minutes. And MP Schmel will go first for the Conservatives, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you again to our witnesses on this very important study. For those that have been following this study here, we've been saying quite often that we agree with the diagnosis. We have a few issues with the prescription, and that in particular, as was pointed out just in our previous witness, is the implementation, the consequences for non-action. And unfortunately, we have seen this through governments of Liberal or Conservative for too many years, way too many. And so I understand the frustration on the side of the partners that helped co-draft this legislation, and also the excitement to see it to the finish line. The concern we have is that we're not sure that based on actions of many previous governments, whether or not there will be any actual follow-up, any changes within the various government departments that are pointed out in a report by a modern treaty commissioner. So the example we've been given is the Auditor General is an agent of Parliament. He or she will table a report in Parliament, talk about it for a week maybe, media will talk about it, and then it disappears, and nothing gets followed up on. Then the Auditor General comes out with another report on a follow-up of the previous report, and we're still dealing with the same issues that they pointed out in previous reports. So the part we're looking at is the consequences piece. What can we put, if anything, in this legislation to ensure that the government is living up to its signature? So maybe I'll start with you, Professor, and then we'll move on to Executive Councillor O'Coin.
Sure. Thank you for the question. And it's a very important question. The Act is structured on parliamentary accountability, which is, as you described, sir. And I would suggest that the reports do carry a lot of weight, some reports more than others. Of course, some reports, for example, by the Auditor General and the Federal Environment Commissioner, just to speak by analog for now, have, I would say, moderately critical findings. Others have extremely important and consequential findings. And the former are kind of good news because it means that things are going reasonably well. The latter can be quite problematic, and it's the latter that tend to get a lot more oxygen over time and lead to results and changes in the departments. So, for example, years ago, and I'm only going to share things that are in the public domain, years ago I was involved in an audit on the offshore petroleum and energy boards on the East Coast, soon after the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe in the Gulf of Mexico. And we made some very pointed, consequential findings, and sure enough, changes happened, and it was a measurable result. And I would expect to see the same in this context with the commissioner in place. You do point out that there are follow-up audits that are possible, so that's a way to keep the issues on the front burner, and there's really no limit to how those take place. And the last point I would make in the interest of time is, of course, this is falling into a different context than the Auditor General, who's a generalist. This commissioner would be a specialist and be in a better position to keep that pressure on. And you'll see woven into the Act is a number of different kind of ongoing ways to keep engaged with modern treaty holders, Indigenous modern treaty partners. And in that context, those Indigenous modern treaty partners will be able to help keep things on the front burner and keep pressure applied so that there are changes across departments in the interest of that whole of government approach that I mentioned in my second point.
Okay, I do have a follow-up, but I will get back to you. I just want to hear from Chief Councillor here. Executive Councillor.
At Clinton Nation, we used to build totem poles for people who didn't live up to their word. We called them shame totems, so everybody could see. And it helped inspire those that the totem pole was made for to do the right thing and to fix it. Once that was done, the pole was cut down. This modern treaty commissioner would be something similar. Would be in a way that if there's faults that the crown is not living up to the treaties that we sign, it's a shame totem. And all of you are politicians. None of you like bad press, and so this would be bad press for the government. Also, it would be Tasmanian Council retains the right to be able to go to litigation if things still don't work. If the modern treaty commissioner points something out and we try to resolve it, and it still doesn't get to resolution, there's always litigation. But this would help strengthen our case. Help strengthen our case against the crown. If the crown's not living up to our agreements, if the modern treaty commissioner supported us as well. Thank you.
Okay, so we agree the name and shame part, and I do enjoy your example. At the same time, we're still potentially going back to court again, right? I think everyone is sick of court cases and ongoing litigation. Is there another idea that you may have, and again, I'm putting you on the spot so you can follow up in writing if you come to it at 2 a.m. at some point, that we can have points to hold departments accountable, right? Like we get tons of reports. The Defense Department is doing this, the Housing Department, it just goes on, right? So, but other than the naming and shaming, there really isn't consequences. We want to avoid the court. What is there anything else you have that we could put on the table?
That will have to be in writing, as MP Schmale has identified, because we're out of time. So thank you. Okay, next on the list we have, and first of all, welcome MP Eric St. Pierre, and you will have 6 minutes for question and answer.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to sub in today and replace my colleague MP Brendan Henley, who couldn't be with us today. Mr. Grand Chief John Paul Murdoch, first, a very belated congratulations on your successful appointment as Grand Chief of the Ayuishi last summer. It's been a big transition for you from law, I could imagine. I'm also a recovering lawyer and new to politics, so I know the feeling. And I'm quite confident, Mr. Murdoch, that the Wominji Ayu spirit and your commitment to community and nation will serve the Cree of Ayuishi very well. Mr. Murdoch, you might remember me. I was a student of yours back in 2008. I was studying at McGill Law, and I spent 2 weeks in Mistissini and took a summer course with Professor Sébastien Gramont, who is now a federal court judge. So I have very fond memories of the time in Mistissini, of learning about the James Bay Agreement, the Paix des Braves, and also about your certain experience working at a certain firm in Montreal with certain lawyers. So I'm not going to recall the past, but name and shame, maybe not. It's being recorded. We'll leave it there. But if I may, I'll call you, I used to call you Maître Murdoch, but I'll call you John Paul or JP. I've got a few more gray hairs. I can assure you I dye my gray hair to appear a little bit more wise today. But very nice to meet you again, and congratulations in the new role. Maybe I'll ask you a straight question about Bill C-10. So Bill C-10 is meant to provide oversight and ensure that the federal government fulfills its obligations under modern treaties. How do you feel, Matt Murdoch, or Grand Chief Murdoch, Bill C-10 fares in terms of meeting obligations under modern treaties, and especially with regards to the Ayuishi?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I was wondering when this was going to happen. I was going to run into a former student. Yeah, that was great memories from that experience. That was the very first cohort we did. I was quite proud of what we achieved and what all the students went on to do. It might not have come across in my introduction. I was trying to keep it within the 5 minutes. But the path to getting to where we are now with the new relationship agreement that we have, the Cree Canada Self-Governance Agreement, wasn't an easy path. When I first started working, we had 25 lawsuits going. Every single chapter of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement was subject to litigation. And where things really changed was when there was an honest conversation. And oddly enough, related to the previous question, we had started our discussions under, back then, I think it was Paul Martin, who was premier. So it was the liberal government. And we made a significant headway in coming up with an agreement. Then there was an election, there was a change, and we ended up signing the agreement with the Conservatives. So I'm especially proud of the fact that it transcended, you know, two different governments, and I think that was because everybody agreed. The leadership on the Indigenous side, the leadership on the Canadian side, and more importantly, the civil servants on both sides. And that's something that we tend to forget. I have civil servants as well. I have an executive director who just retired, and he was executive director for 35 years. So we do have a professional civil civil servants. And I think it's about holding both of us accountable. That's what I meant by shoulder to shoulder. It was when Canada recognized that, okay, we can't do this on their own. We're actually no good at implementing treaties on our own. And when you just think of the concept of a treaty as a document that enshrines a relationship, and to assume that you're going to take responsibility for the whole thing and you're going to do the whole thing on your own, you're going to be accountable on your own, of course it's not going to work. It's a relationship. It's not a transaction. So this is why I was more complimentary about the process of arriving at Bill C-10. I think it's very important that the mechanism that is put in place operates in parallel to the existing treaty relationship. If the relationship is poor, well, that parallel vehicle will be that much more important. If the relationship is working well, then that parallel path can be complementary. So this is how I see C-10 working with our modern context.
Great, thanks for that comprehensive response. I have about a minute and 15 seconds, so maybe I'll move on to Mr. Aucoin. If you can comment quickly on how do you see Bill C-10 building trust with Indigenous communities in about a minute?
Well, just the development of C-10 is an example of reconciliation, that we work together with the government to come up with this act. It wasn't the government saying, "Oh, this is what we think is best for you." As we worked together with the Crown, and we said, "This is the solution that we think that would work for both sides." So just the very fact of C-10 is an example of that reconciliation.
Great, thank you. Maybe quickly, Dr. Wright or Professor Wright, you mentioned that the Commission would up their game to fulfill treaty obligations near the end of your testimony. Can you elaborate quickly on that, and also who benefits from C-10? Very quickly.
Thanks for the question.
20 seconds.
Brief. Executive Councillor Aucoin just mentioned the trust building in the process of building the Act, and I would also build on the comments about how this operates in parallel. I think you could think of the departments upping their game in the shadow of the existence of the Commissioner. So the mere existence of the Commissioner casts a shadow, and a positive shadow that is, across the bureaucracy that helps everyone do better, knowing that this heavier hand lurks if warranted.
Okay, Deputy Gill, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Grand Chief Murdoch, Mr. Aucoin as well, and Prof. Wright. This is the last hour on the study of this bill before going into section study. I would like to hear what each of you have to say about what the different departments, or how they will interpret the different treaties. Of course, it may cause issues and delays. Mr. Chair, I think that some witnesses didn't have their earpiece. Could I start again?
No, c'est...
Okay. They didn't have their earpiece on.
You could? Okay, I'm getting naughty heads online too. So, okay.
I could hear both at the same time, English and French. It was hard.
Start again. We're going to start again just to make it clear. Go ahead, please.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chair, but if Mr. Aucoin has both languages at the same time, maybe we could help him out to sort out this technical issue.
Suspend for one more, and let's have the technician do a little test here.
Being able to listen. Thank you very much, Grand Chief Murdoch, Mr. Aucoin, and Mr. Wright. It's the last hour we will spend on Bill C-10, and it was duly summarized by Mr. Wright. We are ready. All parties have been heard, and if we were expecting any amendments from the government side, we would destroy everything. So over the last meeting, we talked about the way to interpret this Bill C-10, or the treaties, rather, by the different departments, and that may cause issues with some delays in the end. I would like to hear from each of you how you think the Commissioner will help in this interpretation to make sure that it is the same for everyone.
Je peux donner un tour de parole, peut-être.
I can certainly give turns. Grand Chief, first.
Oui, alors je vais tenter de répondre.
I will try to answer this one. I think that you just touched the main issue we are facing now. The differences between departments and the differences between different governments as well. I mean, a change of government may mean a change in interpretation. As far as we're concerned, we have to teach people. This is the most important aspect. Sometimes we leave the treaties gathering dust on tablets, and what is important is that this new commissioner will be independent and he will help in teaching people what it's all about. This is how. This is why the choice of the commissioner is important. Someone who's going to be neutral, who is going to, as I said, teach people everywhere.
Le micro s'est allumé.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Aucoin, and then Prof. Wright. Sorry, I speak a little French. It's more like a...
When it comes to the different interpretations by different departments, that is a fundamental flaw that I think that exists currently within the government of Canada. That our treaty is with the Crown, and that's what we constantly remind them with. Our treaty is not with Indian Affairs. Our treaty is not with Indigenous Services. Our treaty is with the Crown, with all of the departments, all of the government. And so I think that the modern treaty commissioner would help bridge that gap and help get the departments thinking along that mindset. and get the Prime Minister and the cabinet on board as well, because they need to work with us as equal partners, and not just the letter of the law, but the spirit and intent of the treaties as well. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you.
A whole lot to what's been said because those are excellent points, but I'll just three very quick points. One is the beauty of institutions is they can withstand shifting political winds. And that would be one of the key roles of this commissioner, is to provide that kind of consistency, consistent attention to the matters, consistent interpretation of the matters. The second bit I would add is the access to information powers under Section 24 of Bill C-10 are almost identical to those of the Office of the Auditor General. And what that means is you're going to generate a body of information that then kind of crystallizes in the form of recommendations and reports that is unparalleled and is essentially bulletproof. So there's a process at the end of any of these performance audits called substantiation. It's what keeps auditors up at night, because every sentence in any of these reports is substantiated to the nth degree. So you can imagine deep within the system, there's sort of 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 different pieces of information that substantiates what's being said in that sentence. And that can help everybody understand kind of the truth and the facts, and it can help departments have a common view on the subject matter. And foil any kind of different interpretations or inconsistencies. The last thing I would say is that you can't manage what you don't measure. And the ability to generate this kind of information means there will be that much better information and measurement so that the government can better manage modern treaty implementation.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay, now we go to MP Morin, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of our guests here for today. And Professor Wright, you were just saying this body can help with political. There's inconsistency when it comes to politics, so this might help with that, right? It was what you mentioned. I'm going to take a little bit into maybe a forward-thinking context here. In Alberta, we're actually facing a separation movement, and the treaty chiefs are fighting back, but we have no commissioner. My question is to Grand Chief Paul. What is your position on Quebec separatism, and how would this position assist in having the voices of the nations heard there?
Oof, that's a big question. Wow. I think it goes to who's speaking for who? That's our biggest problem. We don't allow for Canada to unilaterally speak for us, which is why we're being complimentary today, because that was not the approach taken. We would not allow the government of Quebec to unilaterally speak for us either. And I think we just had an issue recently with the Quebec Constitution that's being adopted, and that was the message that we were trying to send. You know, they're not things that are independent of one another. You had premiers like René Lévesque, Lucien Bouchard, Bernard Landry, staunch separatists during their time, but they did exemplary things at highlighting and protecting Indigenous rights. I think there's a difference between being a separatist or sovereignist and being an isolationist. And this seems to be the distinction that we're seeing today. Hopefully, a commissioner helps underline the fact that there is a Indigenous federal relationship that the provincial governments cannot ignore, and vice versa. The provincial relationships are being built up. And so I think it's just going to be one more of those. It's going to be one more example to help provincial governments understand that they cannot embark on these things in a unilateral way.
Thank you for your answer there. And you mentioned you didn't agree with everything when there was a drafting of this legislation or this process, but you were hopeful that, or you said that you did agree with some things and those were implemented. But I'm curious, what were the things you didn't agree with?
Well, we had some suggestions in our submission back in June, and it was related to wording. It was actually quite technical. As an attorney, and I guess I'm not supposed to be practicing now, like you're not supposed to be representing yourself, but Yeah, it was technical wording that wasn't retained, and to be honest, I prefer much simpler language than adding words unnecessarily, and that was the recommendation that was retained. And I believe you had other First Nations recommending exactly that. Let's keep the legislation simple. So I'm glad you followed their advice and not ours at the time.
Okay. And for Professor Wright, I think I'm going to do myself a little bit of disservice here because I support modern treaties, and I might come off as against them with this question, but I'm just going to, it might be a little bit more of a philosophical one, but the federal government is 30 departments, give or take, whatever the number is there. It's over 300,000 employees. How would a commissioner make meaningful change on 1 or 2 audits a year? Is there like a system, you mentioned it too, like the system is slow. Like, how can this commissioner make a dent in having the nations being heard in a system like that? Or should they actually even consider having one ministry or one actual position? Or what do you think about, like, can you give me some context on that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. It's no small task. I mean, the first thing I would say is that the commissioner is the missing piece in this whole of government approach. And the federal government has come a long way, particularly in the last 12 or 15 years, in creating an ecosystem of mechanisms, tools, forums, and so on for modern treaty implementation, which includes explicitly, for example, in the modern treaty implementation policy, education across departments for employees. So an example of the role the commissioner might play is following up to make sure that that kind of culture change and education across departments is actually happening. So it exists on paper, for example, in modern treaty implementation policy. It's going to be hard for Teslin Tlingit, for example, to bring litigation under that policy. It's just a policy. But the commissioner is able to shine a light in areas where litigation can't get. And one example would be education and that shift across departments. And if I may build on that in another example, and this may take us in a slightly different direction for other questions, but there is going to be an unprecedented amount of activity north of 60 degrees latitude in Canada, which of course is almost entirely modern treaty territory. Not entirely, but almost entirely. That's going to involve a number of government departments who have typically not been deeply involved in modern treaty implementation. And not to point fingers too sharply, but the Department of National Defense is going to have to learn really fast about what modern treaties are, how implementation is going, how poorly it's going, and how to do things right from the outset. And this body of information that the commissioner will generate will help with that. Will it happen as fast as everybody wants? No, it's just not possible. But bit by bit, report by report, a body of information will build up. It'll build up, I think, faster than people think. And before you know it, there will be a significant improvement that hasn't been seen to date.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have MP Earl for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to be conveying some of my time to MP Laurie Udloat. But before I do that, I want to direct my question towards Executive Councillor O'Coin. And I want to thank you as a witness this morning. Thank you for your testimony to the committee. I observed that you had court interaction with previous administrations, and you highlighted for us that C10 and the Modern Treaties Commissioner for you is about helping to improve the lives of people. And I believe that's exactly why, as members of Parliament, we are here, is to improve the lives of people. So my question for you, in light of the testimony that you provided us this morning, do you see C10 and the eventual appointment of a commissioner as that which will interpret the modern treaties, or will that role avoid lengthy disputes and the avoidance of court action by Indigenous partners?
Thank you. Well, you know, in the Yukon self-government, the umbrella final agreement, we do have a dispute resolution mechanism within it. Unfortunately, all parties have to agree to initiate that. That's why it's never been used. So I think that with a modern treaty commissioner, that would help bridge that any differences between the Crown and Yukon First Nations, so that we can work out those differences. When we took Canada to court in 2018, when the judge came down and ruled, was that it can't just be one-sided. It can't just be the Crown, Canada saying take it or leave it. It has to be true negotiations in good faith. I think the modern treaty commissioner would help be that bridge to so that both sides can meet and come to common ground that we both can agree upon, so we can avoid going to courts and work this out as a nation of nations. Thank you.
No, it's Lord.
Lori, just before you begin, can you say a few words just to test your audio, please?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
And maybe talk a little more. Wait for the thumbs up from the interpreters.
I am joining you from Ottawa.
Yep, we got thumbs up. Thank you. Go ahead, Lori.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. First of all, I do want to thank MP Earl for sharing his time with me. This is such an important study, and one of the things that we've been hearing is that there are gaps in ensuring that the honor of the Crown is being upheld. And I wondered, other than the courts, what other mechanisms are there to make sure that the honor of the Crown is being upheld? And maybe we can start with you, Paul, John Murdoch.
I mean, we've used courts, we've used economic pressures, we've used international campaigns, international forums. Court was one of many tools that we used, I'd say, when we were at the lowest of our relationship. Yeah, so I'd say there's a wide variety. The most effective usually, unfortunately, was economic pressures.
Thank you. And maybe Dwayne, then David, if you can respond to that too.
Thank you. Contrary to popular belief, Tasman Clinton Council prefers not to go to court, and unfortunately, we've been forced to by different administrations, by different governments. So I think that what other tools do we have? Well, we do have legislative authority within Tasman Clinton Council that, with all Yukon self-governing First Nations, that if Canada won't work with us or the Yukon won't work with us, we have the ability to pass our own legislation and take over the fields and occupy that power. But we try to work together. We try to work with Canada. We try to work with the Yukon, and I think the modern treaty commissioner would help facilitate that working together, that collaboration. Thank you.
And David, right?
Seconds, please.
Kuyanami, for the question, I would just take the opportunity to make the point that the timing, it's been a long wait for this office, the Commissioner's office. The timing is actually quite good because you do now have several decades of Supreme Court of Canada cases that does provide contour to the legal landscape, including with respect to the honor of the Crown. You also have academic commentary and policy in place, which will allow everyone to understand what the honor of the Crown means in this context, including the Commissioner, so that they can provide more detail on how implementation is going in that legal context.
Thank you very much. Deputy Gill, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
MP Gill, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will say first that you understand why a bill like C-10 is interesting for the Bloc Québécois. It was said that I'm a sovereignist, and as a sovereignist, and I'm saying this for myself only, but we wish to be free of colonialism. And even if we have not lived colonialism in Quebec in the same way as First Nations and Métis and Inuit, who still have to suffer it, I am convinced that for a nation to exist, that is for its language to be preserved, for its culture to be protected, its identity, in other words, I think we cannot recognize a government other than one's own and to wish to have self-government, because we cannot leave the existence of a nation in the hands of another nation. That being said, Mr. Chair, I would like to hear Grand Chief Murdoch, and if we have time, Councillor Aucoin and Professor Wright, to conclude this study, because these will be the last words we will hear to conclude this study. So I'll let them speak. I think I agree with the saying that it never works for one nation to speak on behalf of another. And I think that's why we agree with this role for the commissioner, because many times I heard mention of a bridge, and this helps because it's a lot for one nation to try and be understood by another nation. So I think a commissioner will help us in this hard work and will help us be faithful to our vision of our own nation. Thank you, Mr. Aucoin. Mr. Wright? Thank you.
Before, we are a legislative authority, so language and culture is essential to who we are as Inland Tlingit. We passed our Language and Culture Act, and then we developed our implementation plan, and we came up with our budget and work plan. We presented that to Canada, and unfortunately, Canada just used some formula that they use for Indian Act bans and for everyone else. It's like we didn't even sign a treaty, and just offered us pocket change after all the Crown had done to destroy our language and culture. That's not negotiation, that's take it or leave it. A modern treaty commissioner would help point that out. To Canada, that they're not living up to the spirit and intent and the text of our agreements, and to protect essentially the core of who we are as Tlingit, our language and culture. And I also hold my hands up to my Acadian people, because I walk with two legs through this world, both which I love, j'adore, and merci beaucoup.
It's been said by a number of folks previously, including former Gwich'in Tribal Council Grand Chief Bobby Joe, Greenland Morgan, that modern treaties ought to be viewed more as a marriage than a divorce arrangement. And I would just answer very succinctly by saying that the Commissioner stands to help the marriage go better and help the Crown understand that this is more of a marriage than a divorce.
Thank you very much. And for the very last spot, we have the Liberals. Deputy Ramsey, s'il vous plaît, 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first time I'm at this committee, and I'm very happy to hear from the Indigenous nations that they were consulted, that is, that they took part in the development of this bill and that they're satisfied with this work. I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Wright. There's this obligation to consult that the government has, to consult with Indigenous nations, but we also have obligations in relations to the United Nations. In UNDRIP, I would like to know to what extent you believe that C10 helps and is in accordance with this declaration that Canada has signed. Thank you for the question.
I'd answer it in a couple ways. So first of all, starting in 2016 with then Minister Carolyn Bennett, Canada provided its, quote, full support for implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That, of course, then became a legislated commitment through the UNDRIP Implementation Act, the federal one. And, of course, there's a provincial one in British Columbia, which has been the subject matter of some discussion recently, and the Northwest Territories also has a statute in place committing to implementation of UNDRIP. Under that, you have a requirement for an action plan. That's the one that I cited earlier. So in place right now is the 2023 to 2028 action plan. Within that action plan, there's a dedicated chapter to modern treaties, which was actually done collaboratively. Again, credit to Canada's officials on that. Within that, you have commitments. And so, for example, there's a commitment to pursue the creation of this very office. And that's a roadmap for implementation of UNDRIP. And so in one way, to answer your question, the commissioner is simply follow through on a commitment to implement UNDRIP. But here's perhaps a more important point. There's ongoing discussion and consideration by courts across Canada as to the legal status of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Canada. Some view it as merely aspirational. Some view provisions within UNDRIP as actually customary international law that therefore have application within Canada. And some kind of throw their hands up and don't know what the truth is or where the law lies. And that's going to be a lot of work for legal scholars in courts for years and decades to come. What's helpful about the commissioner, and this goes to my earlier point about how the commissioner can shine a light in places where litigation can't always go. The commissioner is able to use the provisions of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as footholds for their analysis. So regardless of any fogginess around the law, the commissioner would be able to go in and say, here we have these several key provisions of UNDRIP, here we have the provisions of the modern treaty, and here we have what the government has been doing or not doing, and here's what we observe in terms of meeting the standards laid out in UNDRIP, regardless of lack of clarity in the law to date. And here's recommendations on how to improve. And because that accountability lies with Parliament and with the public, and it's all premised, of course, on democratic accountability because this information goes out into the public domain. It provides healthy, fresh perspectives and evidence for everyone to do better going forward.
Dans ce que j'ai entendu aujourd'hui,
in what I heard today, a lot was said about what litigation represents, how hard it is to always have to go to the courts. In the bill, is there a clause with a review of the Act in 10 years? Because there's no improvement without measuring such an improvement, can we reasonably expect that in 10 years we will be able to evaluate by looking at the number of court actions against the Canadian government? We will be able to look at this to see if this is a measure allowing us to evaluate the performance of C10. And I'll ask my question to the Grand Chief and the councillor. Yes, we want to avoid litigation. Despite my background, I never saw an advantage for the community to choose litigation. It's not really in the interest of either side. It's not the best way of doing things. It makes improvements slower. I think that the existence of the commissioner and the commissioner's role will be another step that will help us to avoid litigation. Thank you.
For 5 minutes, please.
Executive Councillor O'Coin, thank you for your directness and your honesty. You mentioned, who did you all sue?
We sued the Harper Conservatives back in 2015, and then we sued the Trudeau Liberals in 2018.
And did you mention the NDP provincially? Is that what that was?
Well, they're next on the list if they don't start.
Well, I hope you guys can work it out, honestly. If the governments were standing right by their treaty commitments, would there be a need for a commissioner?
If they were living up to all that we had agreed to, both the letter and the spirit and intent, that there wouldn't be a need for a commissioner. Unfortunately, that's not the reality that we live in today, and successive governments has shown that. So it's a flaw in the colonial system that I think that that's why I said in a lot of ways we get treated like Indian Act 2.0. So I think that the modern treaty commissioner would help change that sense within the government itself.
Can the commissioner guarantee that you will stay out of court? Do you anticipate that you'll be staying out of court given the complexity of government with 300,000 plus employees, multiple departments, and this commissioner has to oversee sea to sea to sea 20% or maybe more of Canada's landmass? Do you think you'll still be staying out of court with this position?
Peasant-Clica Council, along with the other modern treaties, we retain the right to always have litigation as an option. But and maybe Peasant-Clica Council, with how many times we've had to take Canada to court, that maybe we're the canary in the mine shaft. That if the commissioner is implemented and is working, and if Peasant-Clica Council doesn't have to take Canada to court, well, that's a pretty good sign that it's working.
Over in BC, there's some trouble in terms of musqueam and cowichan, and it's really unfortunate to see, in my opinion, and I hope, again, cooler heads prevail in that regard, because Canada and Indigenous First Nations people are going to live here, and we have to find a way through it. But there is overlapping territory, and there's even overlapping territory, as I understand, when it comes to modern treaties. How would the commissioner help in terms of maybe disputes internally amongst modern treaty and self-government agreements?
Well, within the Yukon First Nation agreement, that we do have clauses on processes on how to deal with overlap, and so the modern treaty commissioner that's part of if there's something to do with a Yukon First Nation that has a treaty, well, then the modern treaty commissioner would help remind Canada and help remind the Yukon and remind all the parties involved that this is what we agree to and the process we agree to within our agreements.
How come Canada hasn't taken up as much of the dispute resolution mechanisms in the actual treaty agreements themselves as much as they have? Like, if they did, then we would need a commissioner, as you stated, kind of hinted towards before.
If I could get into the mind of Canada, that'd be terrifying. That's a question you'd have to ask them.
No, that's all. Thank you, Chair. I like the brevity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony today, and Chimigwich, Nasi, and we're going to finish this up today. So we're ending with some really good comments. So thank you to all of you, and we're going to suspend for a little bit so we can make the changeover. Suspend. reconvene, please. Thank you very much. And for our next segment, we have the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. Sean Daly, Manager, Modern Treaty and Self-Government Policy. Justin Gilbert, Director of Modern Treaty Management, British Columbia by video conference. Bruce Hamilton, General Counsel, Department of Justice. So we're doing clause by clause. So pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, for consideration of Clause 1, short title, and of the preamble will be postponed. And I would like to ask our committee how they would like to proceed. We have 1 through about 41. We can, through consent, group them all together. And if you wish to make a comment or have a question on any of those numbers, you can just identify that to me, and we can do that. So do I have consent to group them all together and to proceed that way, or would you like to do it in bunches?
Let's do it in bunches, but I do have a few questions, and then...
Okay, so maybe 1 through like 10s?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Okay, so we'll do it that way. So it'll be about 4 groupings then. Very good. Okay. Let's start with, okay, so as the name indicates, this is an examination of all clauses in the order in which they appear in the bill. And so I'm going to call out in groups of 10 each clause, and then we can proceed that way. So let's do the first 10 clauses, please. And MP Schmiel, you had your hand up first.
A quick question for the officials. And okay, so what we were talking about here and what we heard in testimony, we just want to know how the mechanics are going to work to the best of your knowledge based on this legislation. So the panel just before, so we have, if this passes, the office of the commission, the treaty commissioner, modern treaty commissioner. This individual and their office is then going to have to kind of get up to speed on everything going on, right? And there's a lot going on in the north and all that stuff. Under the current allotted projected budget, how are they going to focus in on the pending issues requiring priority, and then all of the other stuff happening at the same time? How is this going to, I guess the question is, how is this going to be separate also from an Auditor General report? Because at that point, if you're focusing on over here, still got these moving over here, then you'll finish up there, you'll move over here. It's, you know, the same way the Auditor General reports. How would this be different?
Thank you for the question. Maybe I'll start with some first remarks, and I can turn to my colleague Sean Daly. So in regards to the difference between the Auditor General and the proposed concept of the commissioner that you have before you, I think a really important point is, first, the commissioner is empowered to not just do performance audits, which are a very important review mechanism, but also to do more deep dive reviews in order to really examine the thinking behind policy, legislative, or program intentions of the Government of Canada, and to shine a light on what may be working or not working in that case. An Auditor General also has a very broad mandate. They cover the entirety of the Government of Canada. This commissioner will be focused just on looking at modern treaties. The Auditor General has been quite good. There's been 3 very intensive studies on 3 of our modern treaties by the Auditor General. With a commissioner, we would be able to have, you know, again, the independence of the commissioner relates to how many reviews they will do, but we will have a commissioner focused each year on looking at the landscape of implementation, whether it's deep diving on an individual treaty or looking at broader, more systemic issues that maybe cut across various modern treaties. So for these various components, I think the Modern Treaty Commissioner can really add to that landscape of accountability for the Government of Canada. Thank you.
Okay, I think my question still stands though. Like, dive, and I get that. That's cool.
Yeah.
But there's only so many resources, there's so many dollars spent, and there's so much time to deep dive into that. So if we're deep diving over here, you still have these problems over here. Once you've done a deep dive there, you're going to move over here, and something else is going to pop up over there, right? Because we've had many decades of this going on. That's kind of what the Auditor General does, right? They're going defense over there, they're doing housing, then they're doing First Nations, then they're bouncing around too. So I agree. This commissioner could probably do a bit more time focusing in, but at the same time, I'm failing to see a difference here. To me, it's going to turn into the Auditor General where we're just bouncing. But help me piece this together.
For sure. And I think it's important to understand that the commissioner is going to be part of an ecosystem of oversight and accountability within the Government of Canada. There are many other components and important tools that the commissioner is one of many. So for example, in Canada's Collaborative Modern Treaty Implementation Policy, there is Section 5, which speaks to the responsibilities of deputy heads to consult with modern treaty partners in the development of policy programs or legislations, to embrace a whole of government approach to the implementation of modern treaties, to live up to the honor of the Crown, to not do the bare legal minimum when it comes to implementation. There is also Section 8, which lists a number of different forward-looking tools that Canada is currently co-developing with modern treaty partners, such as reinvigorating the Cabinet Directive for the implementation of modern treaty policy. We also have a tool such as the Deputy Minister for Implementation of Modern Treaty, which is a forum for modern treaty partners to come and speak to deputy ministers. Related to that, in the policy, in the annex, there is the Intergovernmental Leaders Forum, which is a really important forum for the Prime Minister to come and speak to modern treaty leaders in order to have a conversation about the priorities. To me, the commissioner is a very important tool that feeds into this broader landscape. So when the Prime Minister is going and speaking to the leaders of modern treaty partners, there is these reports that are in the public domain that modern treaty partners have been part of the development of, and this informs the conversation with the minister. Or when the modern treaty partners come and speak to the deputy minister committee for modern treaty implementation, we have these reports there that shine the light on the specific problems. So for me, it's important to look at the broader ecosystem of what is oversight and accountability, and this is a really important tool that adds to that, provides that public accountability, and most importantly, brings Parliament into the conversation, because that is a key piece that we're currently missing.
Okay, I think we're part of the conversation when the Auditor General. It's whether or not the government wants to act or do anything about it, and I guess reports are okay, but they often get shelved. And I was on the Auditor General's website, and there's tons of reports that probably everyone's forgotten about, which is unfortunate. Okay, so when we're talking about the whole of government approach, okay, so this commissioner gets to look at the whole of government approach. Wouldn't it be fair to say that when the government signs on the dotted line, that would be a whole of government approach to actually implement and stand true to the word of the treaty?
Yes, completely.
Okay, so where we've had Auditor General's reports, there's been failure. We know there's been failure. Why hasn't this been addressed right away? Like in year one, you could probably, maybe some leeway as things get worked out, but you get further on, you can probably identify yourselves within your department or just in conversations with the nations themselves where the issues are. Why hasn't those issues been addressed over the years, and why has it gotten to the point where we need a treaty commissioner to produce another report?
It's a great question, and I think it respects the complexity that is our modern treaties. When you look at our modern treaty documents, these are 200 to 400 page documents that articulate a very intricate relationship that Modern Treaty Partners have signed on to with the Government of Canada. Those obligations then reach across every department across Canada. Yes, it's complex, and I think part of what this commissioner can add to is shining light on where maybe there is a failure, and it allows us then, again, going back to that ecosystem, to work with the existing tools that we have into the Government of Canada in order to start to address some of those more systemic failures that the commissioner can helpfully shine a light and provide some recommendations.
Okay, so this goes back to our original argument on this side of the House, right? We agree with the diagnosis. The prescription, I think, is wrong and will not have any meaningful effect in terms of actually living up to the word, other than naming and shaming, which we know may or may not work based on Auditor General's reports. How many reports have we had on the failing of Indigenous Services Canada? It's been many. And then follow-up reports on that. You know, we just did many education studies that show little to no improvement in education, such as graduation rates for Indigenous students. Like, the list goes on and on. So the failures must be known. The failures are out there, and I'm sure the departments themselves managing these programs know where the failures are. You just have to actually talk to some of the leaders, which I'm sure they are. So without any consequences, and I know you can't put this in legislation, consequences to failure will not have any change other than a little name and shame, and a week or two later it's out of the headlines and people have moved on. And I just think there is an opportunity here to do more and actually have some real teeth to this. And I understand why the treaty partners want this. I absolutely do. I know they've been hit with decades worth of failure, and I understand why they want this fixed. And at least this is a step forward in this, but I do not think this has the right mechanisms in place to actually have some meaningful change. I think the structure of government is the main issue, because otherwise, you know, as governments change and political parties come in and out, I think the politicians leading or overseeing the departments would have some say into telling the department, hey, start lining up with the word of the treaty and start living up to your signature. And they probably have. Maybe they have. But I think the structure of the government themselves, the mechanism keeps moving on, keeps chugging along, and nothing changes. And in this equation, other than people going in and out of the various departments, the structure is still the same. The departments still function. Many have gotten bigger, more bloated, and I don't think the structure has any desire to change. We would have seen some changes. The Auditor General report has talked about many ways to fix the on-reserve housing issue, talks about education. The leaders themselves have talked about it. The treaty partners have said, you know, we have lots of ideas, you just won't listen. I just think the prescription has to do more with the structure itself. Government is too big, and it's got set on its ways over decades and decades of just function, that there will not be meaningful change. I don't think that's more of a question to you. I think that's just more of a rant from me, but thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I see Lori has her hand up online. Lori, go ahead, please. We're doing 1 through 10.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I just wanted to use the same analogy that Jamie shared about what the problems are in our current system, and ask Justine maybe if this is the analogy that we need to help show why the commissioner's role is so important. So Jamie is saying, for example, that the prescription is wrong, and trying to make sure that reconciliation is being honored. And I wonder if, based on his analysis of decades of things not being corrected, maybe it was because the prescriptions that have been used have been alternative methods and not the correct prescription. And I wonder if, using that analogy, we are moving in the direction where actually the commissioner is the more accurate prescription that will be able to make sure that these modern treaties are being upheld by an independent commissioner that does not have affiliations to parties, that doesn't have affiliations necessarily that are not only public in nature, but because I do appreciate the Attorney General, absolutely nothing against the Attorney General, but they do have a much broader role of monitoring. And given that this commissioner will have to be a specialist, that indeed maybe this is a more correct prescription to help make sure that reconciliation is being monitored given the independence and the objectives of the commissioner's role.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think you really highlight exactly the importance. And I would add to your comments and why I think there is a level of optimism to be able to felt with this commissioner is the fact that it was co-developed with modern treaty partners. I think that's like a really key important point to emphasize. This is not a concept that the federal bureaucracy itself is thinking is important. This is a tool that modern treaty partners have been advocating for over 2 decades. It is a tool that then the federal government has sat down and co-developed every clause of this bill that is before you today. It is a law that the modern treaty partners themselves feel will substantively change their relationship and address the frustrations that they see and feel and live in regards to the implementation of their treaties. So to me, the co-developed nature, the fact that you have that modern treaty partners are supportive and have developed this bill with Canada, I think is a key component to focus on in trying to understand how this commissioner will change the landscape of implementation of treaties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Laurie, are you finished? Thank you. Jaime.
Yes, I just wanted to, because we're in public, I need to correct the record a bit on education rates. When the Mi'kmaq took over education in Nova Scotia with Mi'kmaq Ginamadnui, our graduation rates went from around 60 to about 90% with the Mi'kmaq school. So we are seeing progress across Canada in a lot of different areas. And just because education was highlighted, I always have to talk about the good work of the Mi'kmaq Ginamadnui and our teachers within the Mi'kmaq schools who are doing amazing work, ensuring that those graduation rates remain one of the highest in the country. And I think that was one of the set recommendations made at one of our education studies. And, you know, that we always have a way of finding progress. I think this is progress that we're seeing. It's not necessarily a question, but as you can imagine, the government is in favor of clauses 1 to 10, and we will be voting that way.
Just a quick clarifying, I wasn't saying, my point was when it's better managed by the leaders on the ground rather than Ottawa Knows Best program. That was my point. Fair. Congratulations on your success.
Fair. So anything else from clause 2 to clause 10? Any discussion? All right. Shall it pass? On division? On division. Okay. Thank you. Now we will go from clause 11 to clause 20. Any comments? Seeing none, shall it carry? On division. We are now 21 to 30 clauses. On division? Okay. Very good. Now we are doing clause 31 to 41. Shall they carry? On division? Okay. Okay, so now, here we go. Shall the schedule carry? On division. Shall the short title carry? Discussion? On division. All right. Shall the preamble carry? On division. Shall the title carry? On division. Shall the bill as amended carry?
Not amended, just the bill.
Oh, no, oh, sorry, the bill, you're right. I wasn't suggesting any amendments. Ça va? Okay. On division. Shall the chair, moi, report the bill to the House? On division.
You don't have to do the last one.
And that's it. We're tout fini. Merci beaucoup. And before I do just a couple things, reminder, we're doing Bill S228 when we return. So please get your witnesses in by Friday at noon so our fabulous clerk can get them scheduled and get them going. And another question to the committee is to establish a 10-page limit on briefs submitted to the committee. We've been getting a fairly substantial amount of paper, and it just has the people just condense it into 10 pages. We good on that? All right. Okay. Is it the will of the committee to adopt a routine motion establishing that up to 3 associate members per party be granted access to the committee's digital binder? Okay, got a nod, and we're good. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? All right, so have a good constituency week, and happy St. Patrick's Day from your Irish Canadian chair. So all the best to you, top of the morning. And thank you very much to all our people that, from the ministries. And I'll point out Justine, that is 3 hours, like we have an early morning schedule. Thank you for waking up so early and being with us and so spry. Thank you.